Good morning and welcome to the Civic Caucus Friday interview. It's Friday, February 26th, 2021, and I'm Janis Clay, chair of the Civic Caucus, dedicated to nonpartisan debate and discussion of issues important to Minnesota. Today, we will continue our sessions related to Minneapolis charter reform by focusing on an important and highly visible example of why reform is needed, the long-running policing issues faced by Minneapolis. Paul Ostrow will moderate today and introduce our speaker, Walt McClure. I'm glad to be joined by the Civic Caucus interview group and want to express our very sincere gratitude to Walt McClure, a remarkable man with a remarkable background, to talk about the systems approach he proposes as a substantive plan to address this very critical issue. I'll now turn the meeting over to Paul and to Walt.
Good morning, Janis. Good morning, everyone. And we are very pleased to have Walt McClure with us today. Walt does, as Janis indicated, have a fascinating history. Walt McClure got his PhD in philosophy and physics from Yale. And following that, or as a part of that actually, prepared his doctorate on nuclear cluster theory. It strikes me that he started his academic life thinking about the smallest possible systems, and now he has evolved into the largest systems. Walt took a turn from his work in physics to really groundbreaking, maybe breathtaking too, work on healthcare in the 1980s, was instrumental in much of the thinking surrounding HMOs and how to reform the healthcare industry. But most recently, as Janis alluded to, Walt has dedicated his time to thinking about large system architecture, which he describes as an effort to develop a systematic discipline for policy design and analysis of large social systems. Walt has been doing this work as senior fellow and chair at the Center for Policy Design. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Walt, for perhaps 10, 15 minutes of highlighting your work, in particular, how thinking about large system infrastructure and systems can help develop our thinking on reform in policing. So I'll turn that over to you, Walt. And again, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Janis. The outrageous death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis officers watched around the nation and the world in live time has finally awakened white Americans to what Black Americans have been trying to tell us in marches and protests for decades. We have a broken system of policing in this country, and it must be fixed. It has galvanized increasing numbers of whites to join Blacks in protests in virtually every city and town in the country. But let's be accurate. When I say broke, I do not mean broken everywhere. We have excellent police officers and excellent police departments across this country, and they are just as appalled at these outrageous Minneapolis officers as the rest of us. Grief-stricken for Mr. Floyd and his family, anguish for the offense and injustice to Americans of color, and deeply angered that these unfit officers and their unfit policing besmirch all officers in this country and their honored profession. If you doubt this, please watch, everybody, the heartfelt discussion of the death of Mr. Floyd and ways forward by the excellent chiefs and mayors of Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. You will learn a lot. And thank you, Helen, for bringing up the link. To all you good officers, my deepest gratitude and respect for your courageous service and protection. We all want to support our police, but that support must stop being blind. We do not support our police by supporting bad policing and police. We support them by supporting good policing and police and eliminating bad policing and police. Despite an excellent chief and many excellent officers, the Minneapolis Police Department has been exceptionally broken for decades, dominated by bad policing and police. How do we know? Thousands of complaints piled up at the Police Review Board, costing the city millions in damages to victims of police violence and brutality. Mr. Floyd is only the latest, but he has awakened us all. Our police department needs transformative change, decades overdue. Mr. Floyd has given us an opportunity. Let us honor him by seizing it. Unfortunately, that opportunity is at risk of being overwhelmed by politics. There is widespread agreement on the need for major change in policing. There is widespread agreement on the goals, but unfortunately, the discussion is becoming polarized between two sides. Those who champion abolishing or underfunding the police, which I and many others regard dangerous to the safety of our citizens, and those who advocate a grab bag of well-intended token reforms like no chokeholds and de-escalating training and so on and so forth, which, because unlikely to produce any enduring serious change, I regard as more distraction than solution. Lacking in all this political clamor has been a concrete vision for what the future of public safety should look like in Minneapolis and how to get there. And therefore, I, and with the help of a small group of smart people, are proposing a third position, a practical strategy with a concrete vision for what our transformed police system should look like. A thoroughgoing transformation likely achieve the goals we all seek. Let me set out those goals and then describe the strategy. Here are the goals that any serious transformative strategy must achieve. Goal 1, enduring reduction in undue violence and racial bias by police, both actual and perceived. Goal 2, reduce crime. Goal 3, increase trust, cooperation, and support from the community, particularly communities of color that our officers need to do their work and deserve. I remind us that these are not only the goals that racial justice advocates and the awakened broader public seek, they are the goals that good officers seek. Now let me describe the strategy. You will find this strategy posted on the website of my organization, the Center for Policy Design, and a link can be found on the screen. While many details in this strategy require further work and expertise beyond our own, I believe this strategy provides a solid platform on which to build to get us where we all want to go. We invite everyone's help to flesh it out and get it up on the public radar. Because the goal is systemic transformation, we need more than the kind of token reforms that for decades have produced no change. We need a comprehensive systems approach. Now, by this, I mean we need to redesign the structure and incentives within and upon the police department to reward good policing and extinguish bad policing. People and organizations have to behave the way the system they are in rewards and punishes them. So if they are performing badly, we need to redesign the structure and incentives to reward them for the goals we seek. You can see our website for more on this systems approach to policy design. Our strategy is therefore a thoroughgoing makeover of the Minneapolis department in both the policing approach and to the personnel. These are the two big necessary steps, and I caution either one alone will fail. Both are necessary. The first step is a new policing approach. The new approach is often termed procedural justice policing, and it rejects the aggressive adversarial so-called warrior-minded approach that has dominated our department for years. This new procedural justice approach has been operative in Camden, New Jersey since 2013 with impressive success, superior to the warrior approach in every aspect, including significantly reduced crime, reduce police violence, reduce racial bias, increase solved crime, and improve community trust and cooperation. So let's quickly explain what is warrior policing, what is procedural justice policing, and what are the differences? They are night and day. Warrior policing is a dominant policing approach rampant in police departments, state police, the FBI across the nation. It is not just a problem in Minneapolis, it is a national problem and a national disgrace. Warrior policing believes the way to reduce crime is so-called quote unquote strength. Heavy-handed force, heavy-handed sentences to instill fear and quell and deter wrongdoing. It is about conducting a war on crime, overwhelmingly militaristic and adversarial. The warrior premise is that every encounter is opportunity to look for criminal activity, and if anyone looks suspicious in the officer's opinion, they should be stopped on any pretext, no matter how trivial, like a non-working tail light or a resemblance to a suspect, and interrogated aggressively while looking for suspicious reactions or criminal evidence. For example, when the North Carolina State Police adopted warrior policing, the number of traffic stops doubled from 400,000 to 800,000 a year. The yield in criminal evidence was less than 1/100th of 1%. And the percentage of angry and humiliated citizens more than 99.9%. Officer opinion opens the door freely to racial bias. In Minneapolis, 54% of traffic stops and 78% of searches are of Black Americans, though they constitute only 19% of our residents. Warrior training also drills police they are at risk of assassination at any moment and to defend themselves with deadly force if necessary against any false move. The officer who killed Mr. Castile had just come from a warrior training session. There is a plethora of warrior training consultants, manuals, videos, classes used by police departments and security agencies all over the country. Emphasis is on weapons, asserting dominance and control by intimidation and force. Little emphasis is placed on interpersonal skills with citizens and suspects, or on fairness, service, prevention, or de-escalating all unnecessary force. Indeed, such emphasis is dismissed as weak. We hear buzzwords like unshackle the police and dominate the battle space. This force-prone, racially biased warrior approach, this so-called war on crime, has failed this country abjectly as the war on drugs. How do we know? First, starting with Rodney King in 1994, we see increasing citizen videos showing egregious force and racial bias, totally contradicting whitewashed official police reports of such incidents. Too many police departments are lying and covering up gross misconduct. Second, even more telling, compared to all other advanced nations, the United States has more domestic police violence and incarcerated citizens per capita, heavily racially biased even after adjusting for differing racial crime rates, than any other advanced country, but no less crime and vastly more murders. Anyone interested in the origins of the warrior approach and its abject failure can read Malcolm Gladwell's brilliant book, Talking with Strangers. So step one is to scrap warrior policing in favor of procedural justice policing. What is procedural justice policing? It's a disciplined new approach to policing that continually trains and manages officers to be not only fully competent in the use of force when necessary, but equally to treat all people, white or of color, rich or poor, with dignity, respect, patience, and voice in all encounters. You've got to listen to their side. Be neutral in decision-making and convey trustworthy motives. 3, consistently de-escalate all unnecessary use of force. And 4, commitment that all lives come back safe, not only officers, but suspects and bystanders. The cardinal principle is do no harm. For more information, there are many excellent articles on procedural justice policing on the internet. Here's a link to a fine one. Check out the others. Let me give an example. Suppose George Floyd had been apprehended by procedural justice police. Imagine the following scenario. Mr. Floyd, we have some serious questions for you, but you are clearly dangerously high. Let us rush you to the guarded rehab unit at Hennepin General. And if the squad car is too confining for you, we'll have an ambulance here as soon as possible. After you're sober, we'll talk to you about whether you knew you gave a counterfeit 20 to the store and also about driving under the influence. But first, we have to make sure you're okay. Give me the keys to your truck and I'll check with the store if it's okay. We can leave your truck in their lot. We'll bring your keys to you when we talk to you and you can come back and pick up the truck when you're sober. Now, that's what I believe is meant by protect and serve. Everybody, the suspect, the victims, the officers. And Mr. Floyd Most likely it would be alive today. And now check out a live example in Camden. Absolutely watch the remarkable police video in the following link. This is what our police force could look like if we carried out this strategy. Which brings us to step 2. We can't carry out the strategy. It will fail unless we also do step 2. This second step, the proposed personnel makeover, is to retain and hire only officers fully committed to the new approach and retain or remove from the force all warrior-minded officers unwilling to change. The strategy must include all necessary actions within and external to the department to carry out both steps. Steps 2, the makeover of the personnel, is as crucial as step 1, the makeover of the policing approach. It will not, the new policing approach will not work unless officers are committed to it. It has been tried and failed with warrior-minded officers who, impervious to persuasion or discipline, continue to think it bunk and weak, despite its definitively superior track record on every dimension of policing performance. Good officers soon see its value. Less danger to officers, reduced crime, yet better safety for suspects, more community trust. Warrior-minded officers blind to its value should be asked to resign and go elsewhere. Those who refuse and then violate the new policy must be removed from the force. Otherwise, this strategy will fail. We believe this total makeover strategy in both policing approach and personnel finally puts into concrete and practical terms the thoroughgoing transformation that is being called for. It will achieve the goals by producing the kind of excellent police force that both good officers and the entire community aspire to. Let me return to step 2, the need to remove warrior-minded officers. Why is this step so critical and why is it so difficult? I mentioned the absolute importance of incentives in system reform. Suppose we have a chief appointed for his commitment to the procedural justice approach, as I believe Chief Arredondo fully is. The only way he can incent his officers to follow the new approach is to base rewards, recognition, bonuses, promotions on successful procedural justice practice and encounters. And conversely, to disincent warrior-minded officers, say coaching on the first violation, discipline on the second, and dismissal from the fourth on the third violation. If the chief cannot successfully remove insubordinate officers, there is no incentive or penalty for these warrior-minded officers to change their ways or leave. They can ignore the policy change and reform fails. In fact, Minneapolis has experienced that reform fails without the required personnel turnover. We have a deep and serious problem, an inability to remove officers who violate department policy. In principle, the mayor and chief have the responsibility to set policy for the department and the authority to enforce it, in principle. But culture eats policy for breakfast. In practice, for reasons that are only partially clear and certainly unaddressed, in practice, for decades, mayor after mayor, chief after chief, have been unable to exercise this authority. Until we identify, understand, and remove all the practical behind-the-scenes obstacles that have defeated the authority of the mayor and chief to remove insubordinate officers, police reform will not happen. Let me give the latest example. Minneapolis attempted to implement procedural justice in 2016. We were supposed to be a demonstration project. It never happened. Not only did the warrior-minded officers ignore the policy, they undercut it at every turn. When Chief Arredondo ordered that the department would no longer use warrior training and officers should not follow it, the police union head, Lieutenant Bob Kroll, said the union would put on free warrior training. This is not free speech. This is gross insubordination. Yet Kroll was not removed from the force. Why? Understand, Kroll, now retired, is not the problem. It is the warrior mentality rife on the force. The city has paid out millions in damage to citizens on whom these warrior officers use grossly excessive force. Yet these officers remain in the department. That is why symptom cures like banning chokeholds do little. An aggressive officer, well-trained in force, can kill and maim you with his bare hands, let alone all the other weapons at his disposal. for enduring transformation that will achieve the desired goals, it is this warrior mentality that must be retrained or removed. There are too many Krolls on the Minneapolis police force. Kroll was seriously aggressive, seriously racist. He said publicly, "My job is to keep the animals in their cages." That's sickening. Another officer, when a black suspect was shot and killed, said, "Oh, another thug dead, good riddance." Now just imagine if the chief could fire a dozen or so of these biased, insubordinate warrior officers who violate procedural justice policy. You would have an almost instant transformative change of police culture in the department. Until the mayor and chief can remove all such officers, no serious reform is possible. That's why the fine new policies introduced by the mayor and the chief and the legislature are pointless until step 2 is possible and taken. Therefore, I invite everybody with any expertise out there to investigate why the authority of the mayor and chief to remove officers who violate policy is so compromised. I invite you good officers, arbitrators, prosecutors, city officials, legislators, and how about you in the law schools and criminal justice schools? What better use of your time? You in the business roundtable, the AFL-CIO, the League of Women Voters, the media, all of you bright and influential people, I invite you not only to study all the behind-scenes obstacles to the chief's authority, but show us how they can be overcome. I don't want to hear how it can't be done, how difficult it is. I want to hear how it can be done. I don't want to hear about problems with arbitrators, with union contracts, with PELRA, with fair labor practices, judicial precedents, and on and on. I want to hear from all you experts in a position in the people, all you people in a position to act, how each of these problems can be fixed. Saying it can't be done means saying no serious police reform is possible. All we can do is more useless tokens. What? Must we have the next George Floyd go down before all of you who can help finally mobilize to fix this outrageous problem of injustice in the largest city in this state? And if we do have to endure another George Floyd, then all of you who could have done something and didn't, think of looking in the mirror. Think of looking in the mirror and saying, I am party to this crime against humanity. We need you influential civic and public leaders devoted to this city to take it upon yourselves, to mount a task force and a sustained campaign to see that all steps necessary are taken until the chief and mayor have genuine authority to remove insubordinate officers. Will you please appoint yourselves to do that? And because warrior policing is a national problem and disgrace, I urge all you good officers in the Twin Cities and throughout the state and across the nation to seize the initiative, find your leaders, organize and lead the charge for procedural justice policing yourselves. I believe reform should be done with the police, not to the police. And I urge racial justice activists everywhere that you see good officers urging reform, work together with them rather than at like loggerheads. Your goals are the same. I have a dream, good officers and activists working together to transform policing in America. Let's have no more George Floyds, not ever, not anywhere, and especially not here. Now I'll get down off my soapbox. And I suppose you should see me when I feel strongly about something. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walt. You've given an awful lot to all of us to think about. And we can now start with questions. I guess I'll start with one and then turn it over to everybody else because I appreciate you allowing us to jump in with questions. But I think the third piece of what you talked about was fighting crime and lowering crime. And so maybe you could just spend a couple minutes embellish on why you believe procedural justice would actually reduce crime.
Because the key to reducing crime is tips from your community. The community knows who's troublemakers. And if they don't trust you, they won't tell you. If they do trust you, they will be eager to tell you where trouble is brewing and help you prevent it and help you apprehend it. That's why the solved crime rate in Camden, once people began to trust their police again, or for the first time really, the solved crime rate went from 15% to 60%. Okay, so the key to good, I mean, every time you see a crime, the police are asking for tips from people who know something. Well, people do know something, and if they don't trust the police, they aren't going to contact them. Okay.
Okay, very good. So Paul Gilje has a question for you.
Walt, I want to thank you very much for a most inspirational talk. This last 15, 20 minutes has really taken me to just respect you very highly, and for the Civic Caucus for bringing you. Let me ask you if you have any knowledge about whether there's a common police academy that trains, requires everybody who's in law enforcement in the state of Minnesota have to go through, or is it all just handled at the municipal level?
Well, there are criminal justice things, and if you noted last the paper, the BCA. Let me see if I have the paper still. What kind of training is required for police in Minnesota? I'm talking about the Sunday Strib, February 21st. Todd Axtell said, the chief of St. Paul, he said, we need to train our officers better. And he says, if you want to be a police officer because you like to fight, or you like to drive fast, or you like what you see on TV in the cop shows, you're getting into the wrong profession. So there is training, and there is requirements to be a police officer. They were listed in this thing, but most police officers are trained in criminal justice schools, and they learn it there. And there are various requirements in order to be a police officer in the state. But there is no single academy that agrees on. But there are all kinds of programs to help train procedural justice policing. Yale was going to do a demonstration here. Yale developed the procedural justice criteria. Tom Tyler there, and a Black woman lawyer in the law school, and did all that research. And they were going to make this a demonstration, but it was undercut by Kroll and all the other violence-minded officers.
Thank you. Just one quick follow-up. Are you aware of any municipality in the state of Minnesota that seems to have it all together?
Well, I can't tell you how much they have it together, but I'm very impressed that St. Paul is way ahead of Minneapolis, and the chiefs out there in Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center, who are dealing with an increasingly diverse population, their remarks were just striking. That's why I would like all of you to go look at that tape of that discussion. It's very impressive and very inspiring.
Thank you.
So I just want to interject before we have our next question that there is currently an advisory committee on post-board rules overhaul. They have been meeting since October of last year, and I don't know the extent to which procedural justice is at the core of it, but clearly that committee is looking at these issues of training and qualifications, and the extent to which they need to be amended and revised in light of where we are today with policing.
Okay, may I add one thing to that, Paul? We have all kinds of good policies, but if you cannot remove officers who are insubordinate and violate those policies are useless. We need good policies, but we need the ability to remove insubordinate officers from the force. And if we don't have that, forget police reform. Well, we can't do that. We can't forget reform. So we have to solve that problem.
Agreed. I have questions from Tom Abeles and Lee Munich.
So, Walt, one of my concerns is, where is the public's responsibility, and how do you bring the two together, the public and the police department? And the issue is time. You can't just sort of do things overnight.
No.
I was born in the South. I've lived in Africa. These things are endemic within the population, not just the police department, but the community. And it's very visible in January the 6th in DC in terms of the divisions of people culturally. And there's fear, not just in the Black community, it's in the white community, it's across the board, north, south, east, west. So how, if Brooklyn Center, if Brooklyn's doing this differently, what's the difference in those communities and how do you deal with it with respect to time and culture?
That's a wonderful question to which I wish I had a precise, clean answer, and I don't. What I do notice is that most people have never heard that the departments of Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center are any different than anybody else. I live in Edina. I've been very impressed by the police in Edina. But how did these police departments become so good while other police departments go downhill? And Minneapolis has been downhill for decades. I mean, we've been piling up these complaints and paying out these things for decades. So I think it's a matter that if good officers will begin to speak with a common voice, and not just one, but all of them, and their national officers or their state officers in their associations, if police unions will start electing good leaders who are in favor of this kind of transformation, and I think it's the good officers who are a big card to play here. But then we need people like the governor and legislative leaders understanding this and starting to talk about it to the public. What would be better for than the Star Tribune to run an investigation of what are these obstacles and what do people say about the way to overcome them? That would educate the public a great deal. But you need public figures talking to the public about the need for this and what we have to do to get there, and that it's not going to be overnight.
Paul, good morning, everyone. I'm coming in a little late and will probably have to be in and out after this.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. But I think that, a major factor that's involved in trying to address police reform anywhere it occurs in this country is race. And we draw our police from the broader community. And there has historically in every police department in this country been barriers to recruiting a diverse police force. You talk about St. Paul being a little ahead of Minneapolis is because St. Paul historically has done a better job of hiring Black police officers. They had Black in leadership positions in the St. Paul Police Department long ahead of Minneapolis. So that it's going to be, this is the most intrenchable problem that the community, our community, any other communities ever dealt with, because we have the kind of police department that the majority of the community, particularly the white community, wants. It protects them. That Edina can have a good police department because you can put in one block the number of Blacks that live in Edina. They encounter very few. And until we can't deal with this development solution to the police department in a vacuum, we also have to at the same time simultaneously address the issue of race and how police are recruited and how they are vetted, and also look at those the kinds of internal controls that are in the police department. And I think that we have to have a plan to reform it. We're not going to get instant reform in Minneapolis, and I think the thing that has been challenging to it is that whenever we start discussing about eliminating the police, we're going to run into difficulty, not only by those whites who are scared to death of that, but within the Black community too, who is most impacted by it. And the thing that seems to have been left out in all of the discussion is that there's been very little communication with the police themselves. In particular, there's a group of Black officers. They have their own organizations within the police department and nationally. And I don't hear any of the people who are talking about reform finding a way to communicate directly with those officers to learn more about where they are. And about my son has been, who is an independent filmmaker, has been working on a documentary with the North High football program during this during this pandemic. North High has 5 police officers as coaches on their football team, and you probably have read something about it. Now, talking with those officers who are on that team, you can get pretty good insight into what some of the issues are within the Minneapolis Police Department. But I don't know to what extent any of the reformers has found a way to begin to capture the views of those who are in the trenches, particularly Black officers, and serve on a daily basis. Any reform that is initiated has to find a way to gather the views of those who are within. Reform, to be effective, is going to have participants from within it.
So T, I appreciate it. Lee, can you ask, you didn't mention race in any of your comments, interestingly enough, I don't think, or very little.
No,
how does the procedural justice model address the issues that T is referring to? And how more broadly would you answer his question? But how does this model address the foundational issues of race and policing?
Officers are trained under procedural justice that you address everybody in the same way. Equal dignity, equal respect, give them the chance for voice. It makes no difference whether they're white or Black. It makes no difference whether they're rich or poor. You are trained to deal with all of them in the same fair way, to be neutral in your decision making, to have trustworthy motives. You have to show that you are equally respectful of all these people. And when you do this, people begin to trust you. I mean, if you go to some of the articles on procedural justice research, you find out that even if an officer gives you a ticket, if he's given you a chance to have your say, treats you with respect, people come away feeling okay about it. It's not the outcome, it's the way they've been treated. And officers are trained to do this. And I agree with T. People need to see officers of their culture in the policing of their community. And it's not necessarily they live there. If they grew up there and live elsewhere and now come back to be a police officer there, they understand that community. They know who's who. So you need people who grew up in the community, not necessarily live there, but who grew up there and know the community and want to be officers of that community. And I agree that having officers in schools who are not in uniform, but everybody knows they're the cop, and they have good relationships with all the students. It's this kind of thing that T's talking about, where you have officers serving as coaches. Kids trust them, they start to talk to them. And suddenly there's a role model a responsible adult male for these people. All of these things help overcome the problems of race, but you have to have a good, diverse mix in your police force, because you need officers who understand that culture, who can tell other officers about it.
Lee, you have a question.
Yes. My question is how we get there from here. You know, the last year since the George Floyd killing, the city council has been very much engaged in trying to get a charter amendment on the ballot that would create a new Department of Public Safety. Initially, it would have just eliminated the police department completely, but then their more recent version of it would allow for a law enforcement division under this new department. It would take the authority, which is currently sort of under the mayor for running the police department, and put it under the city council, and the mayor would create this new Department of Public Safety. Could you comment about that and you know, how that relates to what you are proposing?
I would like to comment on that very much, because I think not only does this council charter proposal not solve the problem, it doesn't say how we're going to get rid of bad officers if we have a police force. And worse, I mean, the police department is only the visible tip of the iceberg of a problem in this city, which has been, I mean, the Citizens League did a study back in 1969 that this strong council, weak mayor system is a recipe for bad government. It can't act. We had council members out in the street during the riot trying to direct the police. They have no authority to do that, and yet they were doing it, okay? Now, every effective government has to have a good executive mayor who is responsible to see that all ordinances are managed and carried out. And if they aren't being carried out, people know who to vote for. In our system, if they aren't being carried out, people don't know who to vote for. You only have to vote, you can only vote for your council member. You can't vote for all 14 of them. So we need a charter, and the Charter Commission is now about to propose a charter amendment, which I think would be a great step forward, which is, let's move from the weak mayor, strong council, to a legislative council, executive mayor, like the legislature and the governor work, because you need one executive who can play. Making ordinances is a full-time job. You can't manage on top of that. You need an executive to manage that the ordinances are being carried out. And you need department heads who are responsible to that executive. And if they're not doing the job, he can replace them. So this charter amendment by the council, or it seems to me going back, they call it the 14 bosses problem. No department can report to 14 bosses when the 14 bosses themselves don't agree on everything. And each one goes in and meddles. So we need to stop that. We have other departments in this city that are compromised because of that. They're just not so visible as the visible failure of our police department. So we need the two together. If you want police reform, you better reform the city governance to an executive mayor, legislative council. And the Charter Commission is going to propose that. That's the kind of amendment we need, I think, Lee. Not to, I mean, they don't even spell out what a police organization would look like. They don't deal with the problem of replacing insubordinate police. You can't abolish the police. I mean, we already have crime running wild because our police force has been so decimated by the riots and so on. We need a strong police force that can be managed, that we can have officers who obey the policies.
So
that's
Walt,
where
I'd like to piggyback off of that with and get your reaction to the large system that is the council and mayor in terms of rewarding good behavior and penalizing bad behavior. Because I was taken by the protests outside of Bob Kroll's home, the demands to eliminate the police department, the extent to which there has almost been, to be quite blunt about it, virtually no accountability of any of the elected officials for the failure of the disciplinary system in Minneapolis. So can we have a successful reboot of the police department if we don't have a government structure where we can hold the elected officials accountable for the outcomes that result from their leadership?
It's impossible when you have a council who has essentially executive authority to hold them accountable. Okay, how are you going to vote for 14 people? You don't get to vote for 14 people. So you only can vote for one. So if I were a voter, I would say to the council member, if you aren't in favor of this charter change being proposed by the Charter Commission to make our government, no other big city that I know of uses a weak mayor, strong council system. They've all given that up because it doesn't work. And the most visible sign that it doesn't work is our problem police department. If you want police reform, you're going to have city charter reform to move to an executive mayor and a legislative council. It's a full-time job to make ordinances. I mean, look at all the debating and so on that goes to hammering out ordinances. So they don't have time to manage on top of that. And you need an executive. So as you say, Paul, when something doesn't happen in the city, you can vote out the mayor. You know who's responsible. And everybody gets to vote for the mayor, not just the people in this council district or that council district. So I think it's a package. If you want police reform, reform the city government too. And you'll solve a lot of other problems which are less visible to the public at the moment.
Thank you, Walt. We have to have a lot more questions. I'm not
And
seeing.
I would say, Paul, I mean, I want to give Paul due credit. He was president of the council and was trying to urge this. I mean, not only did the Citizen League recognize this back in '70, but Paul was recognizing it and trying to get this reform in 2010 when he was on the council. And Barry Clegg, who is now president of the Charter Commission or head of the Charter Commission, remarked on the problem just last week, which is why they are proposing a charter amendment that will be put on the ballot for people to improve the city governance of Minneapolis with an executive mayor and legislative council arrangement.
We were told in 2009 that the city was doing too well for charter change to ever be approved. I think 2021 will put a test to that way of thinking.
I think everybody has seen that the city doesn't do so well when a crisis arises.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we must have a lot more questions. Maybe folks aren't using the tools.
Hand raised.
So just jump. Helen, you must have a question. I don't know that you can always raise your hand because you're the host. So I'm going to call on you. I'm sure you have a good question. You always do.
No, I'll defer to the hands in line for the moment.
Okay. Well, I don't know why I'm not seeing them.
We have Janis.
Oh, there they are. Now I see them. I see Janis and Paul and Tom Abeles in that order. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Janis.
Oh, okay. Walt, I agree with you that Talking to Strangers was just a truly excellent book. And I'd like you to say a little bit more about how that led you to the procedural justice thinking and just, treating people with respect and all those things you had to say.
It didn't lead me there. It confirmed me there.
Oh.
And it added a lot of knowledge about where it came from and what a mistaken move it is. I mean, it's just a complete distortion of the research that was originally used, that the fact that crime is very concentrated in various cities in a very few small areas. And in those areas, aggressive policing can be successful. But broadening that to the entire city or to the entire communities of color is a gross injustice. It doesn't work. The return is so small. What got me was I was reading my alumni magazine, and I graduated from Yale. By the way, Paul, my undergraduate degree was in physics and philosophy. My PhD was in theoretical physics. I discovered there was no money in philosophy, so I decided to try physics. And that's where my PhD is. And then I pitched it over because I decided I wasn't going to be a great scientist and we needed a lot of social science. And that's why I do what I do. So I read about, and I wish I could remember her name, very distinguished Black professor in the Yale Law School who had teamed up with this sociology professor, Tom Tyler, and they did all this research to find out if police interact in the right way. And the article I referred to gives you some history of that. And it's by the Iowa Police Department. Then people begin to trust the police and they feel fairly treated and so on. And then the New York University group has added this extra dimension of de-escalating force. And everybody comes home alive. And watching that operate in Camden, it just was mind-blowing. And when I started this out, I started totally in the dark. I didn't know a thing about Camden. I didn't know a thing about Malcolm Gladwell. And I just sat down and, not knowing anything about policing, said, if I were going to try and reform the police, what would it take? And it takes getting the incentives right. Okay, so it was a theoretical exercise when it first came out, and I shared it with a number of people. And then I learned about Camden, and I looked at Camden, I said, this is it. This is confirmation. I'm not totally in the dark. I know nothing about policing except what I've picked up along the way from some very good officers who have been willing to talk to me. And then my wife is an enthusiast of Malcolm Gladwell, and driving down to Madison to see my now 2-year-old granddaughter, we put on Malcolm Gladwell on a oral book. And there he was telling us all about it. And it was just, wow, the lights began to click. This is where it came from. This is how we got into this mess, this whole warrior thing. And I mean, this whole business of strength instead of diplomacy and caring has failed us domestically and in foreign policy. What, we're going to teach the world democracy at the barrel of a gun? What kind of democracy is that? It's failed us totally. And the idea that we're going to stop riots by beating people over the head. The way to stop riots and protests is to give people justice. Then they don't have to protest anymore. That's the way you solve it. Well, where's the leadership been on this? Instead, we hear about what good people white supremacists are, and they're just fine. We need leaders who will say, it's time for us to give people justice. And a lot of protesters would be more patient if they knew leadership was working seriously on the problem.
I'm sorry, I have Paul and Tom, followed by John Adams.
Walt, Gilje here. What would you suggest would probably be the best first step, however small, that needs to be taken?
If we could find a very visible leader, I mean, I'm long for the days of Bruce Dayton, to set up a task force. I mean, you need a lot of publicity. Shell could tell us a lot about it, how we make that move public. But you need a task force that recruits in all the expertise to identify these problems, study how to understand them, and study how could we overcome them. I mean, we know that in the legislature, for example, we're going to need changes in Pell Grant. And but the Democrats want to protect the labor laws, and the Republicans don't want to undercut the police. And so we need some way to get the legislature working on the problem. Now, who in the legislature could be a leader on that? Well, Senator Limmer is supposed to be a leader on this. And so when somebody needs to draw him into the task force. We have law schools who know all about prosecution and arbitration and so on. I suggested in the larger strategy, because arbitrators are picked by both management and labor, they feel that in order to get any work, they've got to go halfway. You know, they got to decide half in favor of the management and half in favor of the union. And that's not a way to get rid of bad officers. They keep getting put back on the force. So we could turn the arbitrators into a panel. Management and labor don't get to choose them. They're assigned by lot to whatever the problem is. And so they know they'll get work no matter what decisions they make. Now that would be one solution. I don't know whether that's the best solution. There are experts who know all about this. Okay, and prosecutors, we have trouble with prosecutors. People who know these problems can be on this task force, and they can sign out problems. Okay, what are we going to do with the fair labor practices? You can't, I mean, the council will soon learn if they try and abolish the police department, that's an unfair labor practice. Because that's what a little town up in the sticks of Minnesota tried to do, because they wanted to get rid of the expense of their full-time fire department. So they tried to make it all volunteer. And the paid firemen sued, and they won because it was an unfair labor practice. Well, we got to be able to deal with things like that. So I don't know anything about those. Those are way over my head. So, but there are people, smart people, that if we could put them to work, they could identify them one by one and say, here's a practical, technical solution and political solution, so that we can get back into the hands of the mayor and the chief the ability to choose, reward officers who follow the new policy and remove officers who don't.
So I have Tom, followed by John Adams.
Okay, Walt, I guess you gave me a sort of an epiphany when you pointed out that the police department's problems are just the most present of a whole lot of other issues that reside within the city of Minneapolis.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That says to me that we do need what you're talking about, a strong mayor, weak council, or whatever the combination there is. My concern is because of the history of charter amendments, that it takes a hell of a lot of marketing, to use a bad word, to get the citizens to understand what will happen to the police department and the other issues that are underneath their shirt that are bothering them if this amendment or this whatever's going to be put forward to get that strong mayor is not passed. As far as I know, there is no budget allotted to get the city to vote for this charter amendment in the same way that there is a budget to get someone elected to political office. And if we need that desperately based on the epiphany that you talked about with the police department just being indicative of the serious problem. But I would also point out that if we look at what happened on January the 6th, there is a whole network of people that believe basically false issues and things like that. And we have an ex-president who has been able to play that to his personal gain and what he wants to get done, similar to Hitler in Germany. It's been that kind of thing. But that that's a deep-rooted issue that is also sitting behind what we've got here in Minneapolis. There is a huge issue that has to be overcome, and I don't know how to do that without some form of effective marketing or education or whatever you want to call it. And I think we need a budget to be able to do that, and I don't know who is going to
So
organize.
Walt, do you have anybody with an extra $1 million lying around?
No, but there are civic leaders in this town who love this town. And I mean, I go back to Bruce Dayton, but I'm not plugged in anymore. But we have very wealthy individuals who could raise the money for this kind of thing if they appointed themselves as, we're going to mount a task force and we're going to put Gilje, Clay and all his colleagues on the political education of the public. And I think our handle is what you didn't have, Paul, and what Clarence didn't have back in the Citizens League days, was this visible failure of the city in crisis. Okay, the police department is the tip of the iceberg. Now, Barry Clegg last week gave us a terrific education. He talks with all the heads of the departments and he says, well, if we offered this amendment on an executive mayor and a legislative council, how long would it take you guys to implement it? And they said yesterday. Every one of these department heads privately talking to the Charter Commission said the present system where council members can walk into their office and they have to be approved by the council every 2 years. And they know if they cross a council member and if the council member wants something that is in no ordinance, it's against policy. Here's the people whose tickets you'll forgive. Here's the people that you'll work on their street. I mean, 14 bosses all asking for different things, none of them in the line of policy. That's an impossible system.
And that's
so
a message that can be
if
spread,
we can talk
I think.
about,
But
yeah. I'm
so
sorry.
John, I want to give John Adams a chance and then I have Janis.
Thanks, Paul. Tom asked my question, which was, how do you garner support, widespread support from an informed electorate to get a charter change approved? People generally don't pay much attention to these things. And if they vote, and many do, how are they going to find out what the options are and what the arguments are? The insiders understand this and agree with you. But the insiders represent 1% of the voting population. How do we do this?
Well, I would say, one, you need some really influential people, okay, who go to the Trib and say, we need to sell this. And we need people like Gilje who can tell us what charter reform is the dullest of subjects to most voters, but police reform is not. And if they understand that police reform is the outgrowth of a failed city governance that has to be changed if we can make the package go together. But that requires money. It requires smart folks who are in the job of media education, who can devise a media campaign. It requires people on the papers and the radio stations getting up to speed. Who's going to do that? That's going to be one-on-one conversations with heads of radio stations and the paper and so on. Well, if you have a task force led by a really effective leader and it has money, I mean, we have no, Marilyn Carlson virtually funded the Minnesota Orchestra single-handedly, it seemed like. That kind of civic leader is precious.
So Lee,
Okay, that's the reason we still have Vanska.
So while I have Lee and Q, but I guess I just want to hop in and I want to focus on the procedural justice model and how the city would move from the warrior model to the procedural justice model. And I would argue there are very specific legislative actions that need to be taken. They relate to everything from more open data practices in terms of abuses when they happen, but they specifically would have to do with the kind of accelerated disciplinary process. They would have to do with what is the expectation of a Minneapolis police officer. I would argue those are legislative. The actual enforcement of those then becomes executive. But if whatever happened to the notion that that's what we pay city council members to do, why couldn't we ask our city council members to commit to an extensive series of public hearings and public discussions where all of these issues, be they the union contract, be they arbitration, be they what information is public, what isn't, all these issues with the notion of moving to this model, shouldn't that be something the public gets to see their council members struggle with and engage in? It seems to me that we've lost sight of the fact that that's what we elect them, is to make policy and to develop a plan. So I'm curious your thoughts
Paul,
about that.
we had an open forum where everybody had 2 minutes or less, okay? That tells you what the problem is. If people don't like the car they have, they can tell you what they don't like. They can't design the car. That's why you have experts, okay? If you want to have a forum where we hold our council members to task, I rely on the League of Women Voters. Remember the plain language amendment? The League of Women Voters decided we needed this plain language amendment, and they invited in all the council members and, by golly, all the candidates, and they had to say, we have a lot of talented, smart ladies there, and they have an organization that could do a lot of marketing and could hold a lot of people accountable. Now, the legislative changes that you're talking about cannot be arrived at in an open forum any more than you can design a car in an open forum. You need experts to bring you their product, and then you say, I like it or I don't. Okay? That's why you need a task force, because all the experts on the legislative issues can go and talk to the legislators and go and talk to the AFL and go and talk to the Business Roundtable about how to solve these problems and get the political force behind it that you need. A task force of experts must accompany any kind of marketing campaign so that you have a design to actually work on. The council hasn't produced a single design for this restructured organization. Oh, we're going to restructure and sort of guess our way there. You can't do it that way.
Sure.
Okay.
So I have Lee. I have. See, make sure I'm not missing anyone.
Me.
I think Janis, you're still in queue. Did I miss that? Or anyway, I have Lee, Tom, and I have Janis. And then I'm going to hand the gavel off to Janis for the rest of the meeting after that. After this.
You need to leave.
So thank you, everyone. I will need to leave at 10:15, but don't want that to stop anyone else. This has been wonderful.
So, Walt, I want to recommend another book for you to read. This is by Professor Rosa Brooks, who's a law professor at Georgetown University. It's called Tangled Up in Blue: Policing in the American City. She joined the Reserve Police in Washington, D.C., which serves with the regular police on a voluntary basis, and went through all the training, talks about the police training and, use of weapons and all of the other things. But one of the things she comments on is that one of the reasons the police spend more time answering calls in the Black community as opposed to the white areas of Washington, D.C. is because there are a lot more 911 calls that come from the Black community. And a lot of those are domestic issues, missing children who are sometimes just wanted to get out of the house for a while. A lot of things that are not really criminal, but just because, there's a lot of problems that they face and they need somebody to go to, and the police are the ones that come out to respond. There have been suggestions that there should be more mental health workers and social workers. On the other hand, there's always this sort of threat that maybe, there might be some violence involved that would involve, and so that, you don't want to have warriors, but at the same time, you have to have some ability to respond with force in the few instances where those things can lead to something.
I'm delighted you asked
So
this question.
I'm wondering if you could kind of comment on that and
We have working models
aims,
how to do this, Lee.
how to do this. Yeah.
Okay, in Eugene, Oregon, they have a program called Cahoots, and you can Google it up and read about it. It started in 1989, and it was a cooperative effort by a mental health clinic or social work clinic. I forget, the White Cloud or something like that, and the police department. And they developed this program called Cahoots, and it's been working like gangbusters. It's still going. And here's how it works. The 911 operator who gets the call is the first step in triage. And that operator makes a decision, is this a violent situation or a non-violent situation? If it's a non-violent situation, like a domestic dispute or a mental health case or something, but not violent, a suicide threat, they dispatched the social workers, the counselors who know how to deal with that problem. And if there's no threat of violence, they don't dispatch the police also. But if there's any threat of violence, they'll call in both. And the police and the program work together. So if the counselors get there and find some kind of violence problem, they'll call the police in. Similarly, if the police go to a call and they find it's not really a violence thing, they need counseling. Here's a domestic violence dispute. They need the counselor. They'll call in the counselor, and they find out 20% of the calls, just like you say, don't require the police. And it's much cheaper when you don't require the police, because the police don't have a good response except to lock somebody up. Whereas with a counselor, you get them into a program and you work with the family and so on, whatever the problem is. And so they find that, I forget what the savings was, but the savings of not sending the police to problems that police aren't trained for. I mean, we've been laying problems on police that they aren't trained for, and they don't like it. So, and what are you going to do? Put all your mental health cases in the county jail? That's not what the solution is. So here, read up on this Cahoots problem or program, and it should be replicated all over the country. Shame on us that this hasn't spread all over the country. And it does what the council and the racial justice activists want, that we give the experts in counseling first. The police are there as a backup to them when that's the kind of problem, and they work together. They can call each other in whenever needed. And they save, not only do they solve the problems, but they save enormous amounts of money by not having the police go to these problems where they're not needed. So we could adopt that, and that does what the council is talking about. That does what a lot of the defund the police believe. You don't defund them. You complement them with a program that's going to save everybody money and work much better.
Okay, well, lots to be learned. I see. Okay, I see Tom Abeles. You have your hand raised.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Walt, I'd like to go back to my earlier comment because of the remarks that John Adams made and Paul Ostrow made. I don't see any disagreement with anybody who's present here today that if we had an executive, mayor, etc., that the problems with the police and other problems would immediately come under some sort of management control and possibility. The issue keeps raising marketing, and that's the question, old question of who is going to bell the cat. Now we have here today, you know, the Bear, Clay Bear clan, and a lot of the community that's been worked together for a long, long time. We've had, you know, contacts with the Itasca group. There is no doubt that the people that are present here today know with whom conversations need to be held to be able to market or carry this program forward. I don't think we can default back to what programs are going to make the police work, whether it's a social worker, whether it is blended or whatever, firing the bad guys and hiring the good guys, unless the fundamental issue is solved. Otherwise, we're just treating a symptom and not the inherent problem, which is the governance of the city of Minneapolis. And we here, or you here, because I'm just a small citizen 2 blocks from Floyd's Memorial, that have the people here know whom to talk to. And I would be willing to work with anybody who would do that to try to get the executive thing moved through. But I don't think we can walk away from this meeting today without understanding that that's the issue that needs to be dealt with. We can't just report it. There needs to be somebody here or a group of people here would be willing to stand up and make a few phone calls in the same way that there were phone calls made to get people to the next sets of meetings here to talk about other issues. And this is a key issue for the city of Minneapolis and also for the state of Minnesota. So where do we go from here?
We have an amazing marketing community in this town. We have excellent, I mean, I think of Bill Hillsman, who got Paul Senator
Ostrow.
Yeah.
elected. I mean, what an amazing feat. I mean, Shell probably knows all the people who could think about how to market this thing if we had people who were solving the technical problems, because you have to have something to market. So the real question is who are the civic leaders? Now, we had a circular come around with names like Walter Mondale and Sharon Sales Belton and so on give Chief Arredondo a chance. He's got a plan. Unfortunately, the mayor and the chief have not publicly announced a plan. Well, I think this would be a wonderful plan for them if we could reach them. I've tried to reach them. I've made telephone calls. I've made emails. They don't return them. So if we can't get it up on the radar, and I'm hoping that out of this session, 8,000 people on the mailing list of the City Caucus will answer some of this call and call into the caucus, okay, how can we get this thing launched? There are very impressive people out there who have leadership ability, who have financial ability, and can bring the leadership together to launch such a task force. And included in that can be the aspect of how do we politically educate our voters that if you want police reform, you have to have charter reform too. And the Charter Commission has an excellent amendment as opposed to the council, which has a backward step. It doesn't solve any of the problems of getting rid of the bad officers, nor does it. It worsens the leadership problem. You suddenly put the police under the 14 boss problem. So if those people will start to appoint themselves, which is usually what happens. I mean, who put this Friends of Minnesota thing together? I don't know, but whoever did can put it together to do this too. John, you may know something about that. Do you know who put that group together? You were on the list, I noticed.
I don't.
I think he's muted.
Yeah. John, are you there? Can you hear?
He is.
He's muted, but I don't know whether he can hear or not. We asked you a question. I don't know what's going on. But
Okay,
anyway,
well,
John was on the list.
yeah,
There were other names I knew on the list. And somebody put that together, and it was a very impressive group of high-class citizens who were in support of the chief. Well, we go after those people and say, look, here is the larger problem. If you want reform, you got to have charter reform too. And can you put this group together to educate the public about what's needed and put together a task force that will produce the technical side of it and deliver political strategies? I mean, if you want to change legislation, you not only have to talk to legislators, you got to talk to the Business Roundtable and the AFL-CIO. Well, somebody has to talk to those folks and figure out how can we get a compromise going that will allow the chief to dismiss insubordinate officers. Without that, we can't have any police reform. That's all I can hope for, is that this message going out, and I don't know whether John is still with us or not, but he can tell us how that thing got put together and how his name got on the list.
Okay, well, Walt, you have given us an enormous amount to think about today. That is for sure. I'll just one last call for questions here, and I think we're, everybody, I can just see it on your faces. It's like, wow. So Walt, you keep mentioning the experts and all those people out there, but what you have added is just an amazing piece to this with your systems approach. And I just want to thank you deeply for that. And
we try and add that to everything. So if you go to our website, you'll find all about our systems approach to changing large systems.
Well, it's just fascinating. You went from tiny systems to large systems, and you looked at
healthcare, education. I've been working on redesigning the economy. It's all on our website.
Yes, well, I hope everyone will take a look, and we just deeply thank you for your time today and your thoughts and your inspiration.
Oh, I'm delighted.